Hello, my name is Rick Roberts. On behalf of the Storytelling Association of California, or SAC, welcome to the fourth Stories in Living Color event, where paired storytellers will be telling stories that they have been working on together for some months now. Stories that help us to get deeper into discussions about race, racism, and prejudice. We appreciate that despite Zoom fatigue, you have chosen to be with us here tonight, because we know that's a real thing. Barack Obama recently said that the first step towards real equality in our country is for us to listen to one another's stories. And I didn't even prompt him to say that, he just said it. And that's what we're doing. And the way I figure it, we only have a couple 100 million more people to reach. So tonight we have tellers from Philadelphia, Detroit, Southern California, and Iowa. And our MC, Malcolm Grissom, will introduce you to these tellers. Malcolm is on the board of SAC, and he's a storyteller, a communications coach, and a friend. So Malcolm, I'll turn things over to you now.
Malcolm, you're muted.
So
Malcolm, you're
now
muted.
I'll unmute myself, and now I'll actually say everything that I just said again so everybody can hear it. So, Rick, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Everybody else, I hope you're doing well in Zoomland. And I hope everybody has great holidays. We want to start the holidays for you tonight with a really fun night. I'm really excited and anxious to share this night with you because we've got four really amazing, I'm sorry, I'm gonna overuse that term probably, but that's because they are amazing storytellers. Each one of them comes from a different flair in life, and they bring their flavors to their storytelling and their discussions, and so I'm really looking forward to that. Before I introduce the actual storytellers, I want to go over one thing for everyone, because I want you, towards the end of the night, I want you to be able to ask any questions that you have of myself or any of the storytellers. Actually, any of the storytellers, you don't want to hear from me. So first of all, so I want to make sure everyone understands how to raise their hand. So, well, first, actually, there's a chat bar. So if you go down to where it says chat, that little icon that says chat, and you click on that, then on the side of your screen is a chat bar. So if you don't want to ask your questions live, then just write out your questions and I will ask them of the tellers. For other people, after the tellers and I have discussed a little, that would be your opportunity to then ask any questions that you would like to ask. So I would like to invite you to do so by first raising your hands. And how you do that is, again, you go down to the bottom of your screen. Right next to chat, there is another icon. It says participants. Click on that icon, and then that will bring in the same place on the side of the screen. That will bring up a place where you can go to raise your hand. What mine? Yeah, you might have to go to the where it says more. You might have to go to where it says more, and then that would bring up different icons that you can use. But this is where you can also raise your hand. And so at the end of the night, when it's time for audience discussion, I would invite anyone who would like to ask their question to do that as well. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce, we have four amazing, I told you I was going to use that term. We have four amazing storytellers for you. We have, let's see their names. I'm sorry, my screen is not working here. So our first one is Harlene Geyser. And then we have, after her, we have Jackie Jonas, and we also have, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. We also have frog in your throat. No, we also have Janice Burnett. And finally, Patricia Coffey. They're all going to be sharing their stories with us tonight. Our first teller is going to be Harlan Geisler, and she is very experienced in storytelling. She was a part-time librarian for a while. She's also, especially during these times of COVID, she and her husband have been very, very active in the Black Lives Matter movements. She is in San Diego, and she wears her shirt, her Black Lives Matter shirt everywhere, and she marches. I think that's wonderful, especially in San Diego. So please welcome my friend, and soon to be your friend, the very talented, the very knowledgeable, the very experienced Miss Harlene Geisler.
I was raised to be a racist, a sexist, a consumer, and a victim. When I found this obscure Greek myth, I found an attempt to explain the way the world works, or rather, how it doesn't work. It took me to a dark place. I had to put a sign on my desk that reminded me, hope, not doom. After hearing this story, you might need a similar sign. The tale of Erysichthon. Erysichthon was a king in Thessaly, and Erysichthon was no worshiper of gods. So when he decided to build a new banqueting hall, he knew what words to use. And he led his slaves and servants to the sacred grove of Demeter, goddess of all growing things. And he pointed at the tallest tree in that grove, and he commanded, chop it down. His men looked at the branches from which there hung so many notes of thankfulness for good harvest given by the worshipers of Demeter, and they stepped back in horror. And the bravest of them spoke up, "Sire, we cannot." And when Erysichthon heard that, he said, "You dare, you slave, to tell me what to do." And grabbing the man's axe, he chopped off his slave's head. And screaming like a man possessed, he took that axe and he buried it deep within the trunk. And from that wound, blood gushed. And the dying spirit within the tree called out, You will be punished. Erysichthon had his wood, and he built his banqueting hall and held within it a great feast. The nymphs who used to dance around that tree in the twilight all went to Demeter and pleaded with her to have Erysichthon punished. Demeter agreed and took her own chariot and gave it to one of the nymphs so that she might deliver a message to Famine. The nymph went to the very edge of Famine's land. The message that she had was short, and she delivered it quickly. But even in that short time, she began to feel the gnawing within. Famine flew that very evening to Erysichthon's palace, and as he slept, she wrapped her bony arms around him. Famine is a dread sight. Sunken eyes, skin pulled tightly over bone, and she breathed her essence into Erysichthon. And when he awoke in the morning, he was ravenous. And he called for food and more food and more food, enough to fill the whole city. And he ate it. And it was not enough. He ended up selling his lands, his slaves, his palace, his cattle. He dismissed all of his servants. He used that money to buy more food. And still it was not enough. Finally, all he had left was his daughter, Mestra. And he sold his own daughter into slavery. Mestra was given to a ship's owner. And as she walked behind the man, she prayed silently to Poseidon, god of the sea. You who took my virginity, who raped me, you owe me now. Save me. Poseidon heard, and he changed her on the instant into an elderly fisherman sitting on the shore of the sea, mending his nets. The ship's owner glanced behind it and, bewildered, said to the fisherman, was there not a young girl with long brown hair just a minute ago? And the old fisherman looked at his wrinkled hands and he smiled and he said, there has been none upon this shore today save for thee and me. The ship's owner left, and when he was gone, Poseidon changed Mestra back. She ran to her father. She told him all that had happened. Erysichthon said, wonderful. I'll sell you every day. And every day he sold his own daughter into slavery. And every day Poseidon saved her, changing her into a hare, a hawk, a hound. But finally, the money that was brought from selling was not enough. And Erysichthon was so hungry. And he looked down at his own hand. And he began to eat. And he ate and ate until he had consumed himself. And Demeter saw all that was left, a gaping mouth. And she turned her head aside in disgust, and she destroyed that mouth. And thus ends the story of Western civilization.
All right, thank you very much. So I have a couple of questions to begin with. So the first question is, what attracted you most to telling this myth?
Well, Jackie and I had worked together on our stories, and I had actually taken the time to, when I say, you know, that I was raised to be a racist, I sat down and I thought about all the things that happened in my life, the people in my life, who, you know, gave me those messages. I don't think anybody, um, you know, if you ask my family, they'd say they were pretty liberal, but I wrote down everything that I could think of, and you know you, Malcolm, are an incredible storyteller of personal stories, but it's not my background. I am totally folk tales, and even to tell a myth is unusual for me. So I gave the story to Jackie, and she looked at it and she said, "Well, you've got a lot of great fragments here, but none of them are a complete story." And I tried to, she said, pick out one piece, and I tried, and I couldn't think of how to expand any of them. And you know, next time I swear I'll take your class, you know, on how to tell personal stories, and hire you as a coach. But you know, we had a limited time, and I was talking to her, and I found myself telling her the story of Era Sikthon. This fact that, even though this is in an ancient time, to me the Greek myths really, are just as contemporary. You know, I mean, even today we are all consumers. We are all destroying the earth as he destroyed that tree, and you know, the gods are angry with us, and they are destroying us. You know, and one way that they are destroying us is forcing us to continue to consume too much, and his greed, and the fact that he's a rich man, the fact that he has slaves, um, you know, from the very beginning, you know, and even then they would have had African slaves. Um, the, and the fact that he, you know, it's never, the destruction is never just of the people who are poor and downtrodden. You know, it is not just of his slaves and servants, the slaves that he kills for speaking up. Um, it, it is also, we destroy ourselves. I mean, when I thought of you know, the racism in my life, that destroyed me. You know, that destroyed me. You know, I I think about, like, how can we turn the world around now? You know, and what does that mean? Does that mean that, um, not just the 1%, but that all of us have to give up, our banqueting halls. We have to give up our riches, as Era Sikthon was forced to. And some people in this country are only going to do it if they are forced to. Um, and so that's how the story, you know, really spoke to me.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a wonderful story. Wonderful story. And
Thank
you
you.
did such a wonderful job telling it. That was great. And I wanted to just make a quick point to you and to the rest of the audience about what I was saying about personal stories is I don't think personal stories are really that are any more powerful than myths, or legends, or folk tales. Actually,
Yeah.
it's all storytelling. I think that, um, with the myth, and that's what you've done in this in this conversation. With the myth, it's really, you elevate its power when you connect yourself to the myth, when you connect our society to the myth. So it's not just telling that story, but it's making those connections. And because everyone is, because you are the one that's there telling the story, that's what makes personal stories, that's why they're so powerful, is because the audience and everyone, they see you and they want to know about your story. And so telling your story is powerful. Telling your story in connection to this myth that really connects everybody is very powerful too. And you've done a really good job with that. I really applaud you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
What was it like working with Jackie on this assignment?
She is a real character. I love her dearly. I even took a cooking class with her on Sunday through Zoom. And I highly recommend her cooking classes. And I learned how to make Trinidad pilau. And the thing that really connected us, and why, when I saw her name on the list and saw her description, the fact that we're both Jewish, was just icing on the cake, because we could speak to that too, and it's, when I say that I was raised as a victim, I was born in the generation after the Holocaust. So we grew up knowing that there might be times when we'd have to make hard choices too. And I remember as a teenager discussing, as Jews, if America got into a war with Israel, what side would we fight on? And somebody's asking, why isn't the speaker pinned so we can see her speaking? I think you have to put yourself on speaker view so whoever's talking can see you.
Right.
Because I see myself and I see Malcolm.
Right. I think that's it. So yes, with that, let's move on. Okay. So thank you very much, Harlan. And now let me so what happens when evil all around you takes residence in your soul? Jackie Jonas is here to explain that. Please welcome Jackie Jonas.
Okay, Jackie.
Jackie Joyner.
Jonas.
Jackie Jonas.
So we got my name right. When Harlan and I talked about her story, about Erisiphan, it occurred to me that he fell victim to the evil all around him. It's a danger when we live in a broken society that we will take the brokenness of that society into ourselves. It will sit in us. And sometimes we will destroy the people around us, and sometimes we'll destroy ourselves. I grew up hearing stories that made that absolutely clear, because I grew up in a small Southern town. Small Southern towns are breeding grounds for stories. I know that people think that the great Southern writers like Eudora Welty or Faulkner were masters of fiction, but those of us who grew up in those places, we know that they just sat on the porch and took notes. A Southern porch is like the front row of a parade of characters, and my town had one of everything, including a bag lady. Our bag lady's name was Miss Delia, and whenever I try to describe Miss Delia to anybody, I always end up at the Parthenon. Miss Delia was like that, a ruin in beauties, a beauty in ruins. You could see it. Standing in front of you was this woman with wild hair, wearing everything she owned, but that hair was jet black, just shot through with silver, and her skin, even though she was old at the time, was completely unlined, cafe au lait. And her lips were bowed and her wrists were delicate. You could see it, the Parthenon, that beauty in ruins. But as kids, we didn't notice that. What we noticed was her behavior. We used to follow Miss Delia around just to learn curse words, and trust me, she knew them all. And we used to watch her do her best trick. It happened on Sunday. She'd stand at the top of the hill on the street that separated the white and black sides of town. And she'd wait for the mayor's white Lincoln to come over that hill. And just as he crested the hill, Miss Delia would turn her back, throw her dress over her head, and send that man to glory every Sunday. Our favorite thing, though, was to stand with her under the window of her sister, Miss Odessa, and have Miss Delia narrate for us exactly what was going on in the bedroom of Miss Odessa and her husband, the deacon. It quite completed my education. But over time, as I got older, I began to wonder what happened to Miss Delia. You don't just get that way. And I started to wonder what broke in her. So I asked my grandmother. My grandmother knew everything about everybody in that town, and she refused to tell me. I badgered her and badgered her and badgered her until finally she spun around on me and said, Delia went crazy over a man. Well, I was completely and utterly flummoxed. I come from a family of women whose job it is to drive men crazy, so I had no conception of someone going crazy over a man. But over time, I learned the rest of Delia's story. I pieced it together and I found out what broke in her. Delia Foster was the youngest daughter of the family of what passed for the Black bourgeoisie in my little town. Her father, Dr. Foster, was on the faculty at Fisk, and her mother had been a librarian there until she went home to raise her daughters, the three Foster girls, Odessa, Ophelia, and Delia. They grew up to do the things that those sorts of girls do. And Delia went to Fisk, right behind her sisters. And then she surpassed them by being accepted to one of the better white schools up north. And then she came home to fulfill her destiny, which was to marry a nice young man from one of the better families. You know, sometimes life gets in the way of your destiny. And it happened that a young man came through my town on his way to Fisk, and he stopped off to pay his respects to Dr. Foster. Now, this boy, Sam, was not part of the Black bourgeoisie. Matter of fact, he was the first person in his family to go to college, and well, truth be told, his people were sharecroppers. So it never crossed anybody's mind that this boy would have any designs on a foster girl, and it probably never crossed his mind either until he saw her. I can just imagine what it must have been like to be sitting in a parlor in a little southern town and turn around and see the one for whom your soul has yearned. There she is, standing in the doorway with the light streaming on her. Her hair is curling down her neck, her skin so soft and lovely. She is yours. And so Sam and Delia began a quiet courtship. But you can't be quiet in a little southern town. There are no secrets in a little southern town, and word got round. So Sam did what every young man does. He went to Delia's father and asked for her hand, and he was turned away. Now, they say that when Delia found out that the whole street heard the screaming and yelling, the Fosters of all people were having a knockdown, drag out fight. They heard Delia stomp up the stairs. They heard all outside her door slam. And 2 days later, they saw her when she came out of that room. She walked right down the steps out of the house and began to pace up and down the street, repeating word for word, every word of the argument she had about Sam with her parents. And finally, she just repeated the last word, their final objection to him, over and over again. He's too dark. He's too dark. He's too dark. I never saw Miss Delia the same way after I figured all this out. I went away to college, and my mother wrote me a while later and told me that Miss Delia had died. She said there weren't many folks at the funeral. Nobody really remembered her. My grandmother was gone. But I remembered her. And I want to tell you that I think Delia won. Because I didn't understand why anybody would turn down a man because of the darkness of his skin. And my daughter can't even conceive of it. And Delia, I think she's sitting in heaven now. She's perched on the edge of a cloud and she's swinging her feet back and forth, and she's got her arm around the waist of a long, tall, dark-skinned man. And she's saying to us what my granny always said to me: the blacker the berry, baby, the sweeter the juice.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. That was great. Thank you. Applaud, applaud, applaud. So awesome. I want to ask you, when we were talking and when we had our rehearsal, you had mentioned that you were told by several of your Black friends that they didn't want you telling this story. They said, don't tell this story. We don't like it. Why was that? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I get that reaction sometimes from audience members as well. And they think about it, they think about it as telling stories, telling tales out of school. You know, there's this thing in our community called colorism, or as my grandmother used to say, color struck. And we don't want white folks to know about this. And my response is always, darling, they already know. They made it up. part of there's a whole history of why we have colorism in our community, and it goes back to that house slave, field slave division. And so to speak to why I tell the story, you cannot end a problem that you do not acknowledge. And it's not our problem. It's our problem. It's the problem of the whole society. We all need to talk about the way we have broken each other. And then those of us who have incorporated that, need to think about what we can do to make it stop. Can't stop it if you don't see it.
Tis true. Tis true. Tis very, very true. So much like Harlene's story, this was a personal story, but it was more of a biography. So it's more about someone else rather than an autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned a little bit of how it affected you. Would you like to add to that?
Well, it really is autobiography, because all of us deal with that in some way. I'm very lucky. I was raised in a family where colorism was deliberately eliminated. It was talked about and it was eliminated. But and this is a real lady. I changed her name because she has living relatives and I want to be able to go home. But this particular family, built their whole identity on the lightness of their skin, and on preserving that through the generations. And to see the lengths to which someone will go to identify with their oppressor as a way of, and that's a coping mechanism. There's no judgment when I say that. That is a coping mechanism. It helped me, first of all, to appreciate how I had been helped not to do that, but also to have empathy and sympathy for people who haven't been able to not do that, who are still on that journey. Miss Delia, and I feel like her story needs to be told because she needs to be heard.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yes, very good, very good. So what we are going to do now is again, we're going to thank our two speakers, Harlan Geisler and Jackie Jonas. And, now we are going to take a 5-minute stretch break, bio break. Just get up and get away from the screen for about 5 minutes and stretch your eyes. And then we're going to come back and we're going to have our other two speakers and much more discussion. Okay? So with that, I'll see you all in 5. All right. Everyone back from their break? Are ready for the rest of the show? I know I am. It's great. Okay, so the theme of tonight is really, it's really, we came upon it very organically. It just happened that it just melded from the different stories. So the theme is, well, I'm gonna let you guess. After you hear these two stories, I'm going to let you guess, and we can end the night with you telling me or telling us what you believe the theme to be. But what I will tell you is both of these next two tellers are amazing and they are going to tell wonderful personal stories based on the healthcare system and the failings of the healthcare system. So first of all, we have we have a story. So the next teller is going to be telling you a story, not only of the brokenness of the healthcare system and the poor especially, but also how the healthcare system has failed teaching these healthcare caregivers. So if you are a caregiver or if you care about healthcare at all, you want to listen to this story. This is told by a Black woman who all her life has wrestled with what it means to care for another and what it means to be cared for. Please welcome Janice Burnett.
That boy is going to need to be seen by a doctor. I don't know if you heard me. That boy is going to need to be seen by a doctor. Those were the words my grandmother was advising my mother of. But sitting at the dinner table, I was both confused and very worried by her words. Worried because I knew she was talking about my brother. My brother was having episodes of nosebleeds that were occurring at least daily, every day. They were happening at home, at school, at church, anywhere. They were both embarrassing and they were frightening. But most of all, it was confusing because she was talking about sending us to a doctor. Now, all my life, I had known my grandmother to be the doctor. We didn't have health care, but it wasn't worrisome for us because we had Dr. Grandma. We didn't worry about not having health insurance. We had her as our doctor, our nurse, and our pharmacist. And she had a lot of notches in her belt for all the things that she had treated and successfully cured. Everything from dandruff to hemorrhoids and everything in between. She had even saved some marriages with some of the things that she had cured. So she had a lot in her credit. So for her to suddenly say she was sending us off, she was going to be sending us to a doctor someplace else, to a stranger. It was worrisome to think that my brother's healthcare problem was beyond the care of my grandmother, who could take care of just about everything. Well, she had heard about a free clinic that was across town, and she referred us. We left a couple of days later to go to the clinic. Now we went armed with nothing more than the address, the hours of operation, and of course, that it was free. We're riding, it seemed like forever, but it was 2 long bus rides across town, 2 very long bus rides. Now, my brother Bobby was my hero. He taught me how to read. He was a wonderful artist, and he could beat just about anybody in checkers. And so I was glad to be going with them. I was glad to be going to see where he was going to be treated and how they were going to resolve these awful nosebleeds. When we arrived at the clinic, we must have looked like we didn't know what we were doing and where we were going, because the guard looked over at us and said, "First time here?" My mother nodded. It was. He said, "Fill out those forms over there on the wall and then take them to the lady behind the partition over there. She'll tell you what to do." My mother filled out what seemed like at least 3 or 4 forms, 3 very long forms. And just for a nosebleed, but it was our first time there, so we proceeded. She took the forms over to the woman behind the partition, and the woman began in her loudest outdoor voice asking all the questions that were written down and my mother had answered. She was asking the questions all over again. By the time she got through with us, everybody around us knew why we were there and all of our personal business. Take a number and have a seat. Have a seat indeed. That room was so full of people, I don't think that there was any place but the floor to sit on. Well, my mother she found 2 chairs. My brother sat across from us and I sat in her lap. I sat in her lap and I slept. I slept, I woke up, I slept, and I woke up again. And just as I was about to ask my mother, how long are we going to have to stay here? A woman came out from the door and called, "Taller!" My mother gathered us up quickly and rushed us across the room before she called anybody else instead. We got to her and she said, "Both these kids going to be seen today?" My mother said, no, she assured her it was just my brother. You don't need to bring but the child that's going to be seen. You ought to know better. We don't have insurance and we don't have the space for extra kids. Just bring the child that's going to be seen. My mother tried to offer, there was no one to watch me. You find somebody, don't worry about it, but don't bring nobody back that's not going to be seen. And we followed her to the curtained area that we were going to wait in behind the doors. She sat down and took the forms from my mother again, asked her again and affirmed what my brother was there for, set him on the exam table, and the doctor will be in a minute. A minute. My mother sat down on the stool and I sat in her lap again. I fell asleep again and I woke up and my brother and I, we were tired. It was dark outside. We could see out the window that it was dark outside. We were tired and we didn't mind complaining that we were tired and we were hungry. And how much longer was it going to be? My mother reached into her purse and I didn't know what kind of goodie she was going to pull out, but I was hoping it was a bowl of Cheerios. Instead, it was 2 Starlight Mints. She gave one to my brother and one to me. Suck on them and don't chew and try to be patient. That shut our mouths for a few minutes anyway. And we began to whine again when the Starlight Mint was gone. And just as I thought we were about to convince my mother that we needed to go home and come back another day, 3 men pulled the curtain back. Without looking at my mother or addressing my brother, the one in the long white coat looked at the nurse and said, "What's he here for?" She repeated what my mother had told her, that he was here for nosebleeds. He walked over to my brother, took his chin in his hand and reached in his pocket to pull something out. My brother instinctively pulled his head back. The doctor looked at him and said, "Am I going to have to hold you down?" My mother jumped up then. She stood up. She said, "Are you a children's doctor?" He looked at her. He said, "Do you want him seen or not? I got a room full of patients that I have to see. Do you want him seen?" My mother said, "Well, he's afraid. This is his first time seeing a doctor. You can see he's just afraid." And to calm my brother down, she said, "I'm here, Bobby. He just wants to look at your nose. Don't worry, I'm here." The nurse cautioned her not to go over toward my brother. "It'll be faster if you just let the doctor handle this." The doctor looked up both sides of my brother's nose, looked into each nostril, and he turned to the nurse to give her some direction, and she left the room. My mother asked, "What's wrong with my son? What are you going to do?" He never turned to my mother. Instead, he talked to the 2 boys that were with him. I later would find out, many years later, that they were medical students. He turned to them, talked with them, we tried very hard. I mean, you could hear none of us made a sound, trying to hear some word, something that we could catch, understand what was going on. We didn't understand a word of what they said. I think he was a good whisperer. The nurse came back with a long cylinder can, and he pulled out what looked like the longest match I'd ever seen. My brother, tears were running down my brother's face. I started to cry, even though I wasn't on the exam table. I was scared for my brother. They held both my brother down. Both the men held my brother, and he put the matchstick on one side and then on the other side. Many years later, we found out that he was cauterizing the blood vessels in my brother's nose. My mother asked one more time, "What are you doing?" He said, "The nurse will explain everything when we're done." And he turned to walk out of the room. The nurse turned right behind him to go out of the room too. And my mother said, what did you do to my son?" She said, "Everything, he'll be all right now. Everything is better now. Don't worry. Just don't let him blow his nose for 2 days." And they left. Now, I can tell you that I was surprised at my mother's restraint. I had seen my mother deal with rude and disrespectful clerks in the store. And I can tell you that my mother would get anybody straight in a New York minute that she was not the one to be treated that way. But here, my mother was restrained and quiet. But as soon as they left, when she started to get our coats on, she told us everything that she wanted to tell them, but didn't. They think we colored people have to take anything that they give us. We don't have to take being treated like this, and we're never coming back. She says, "I hope that what he did stopped that nosebleed, because we will not be coming back to be treated like this." My brother and I were crying, and my mother, I could tell, had silent tears. Her tears she let out in all the verbiage that she was fussed all the way home. I can report that it did resolve my brother's nosebleeds. His nose didn't bleed anymore after that. But I could remember for a long time the bad taste it left in my mouth about the free clinic. I guess I would say that it was that day or that doctor or that clinic, and it was an exception, and maybe you should give it a pass. But I can tell you that I have spoken to, oh, so many Black and poor people who have been to such clinics and have been abused and degraded and treated with such horrible disrespect. But I also would say, I wonder about the doctor who was being trained and who was training 2 other doctors. I wondered how they could go from cadavers in medical school to mistreating poor people. How do you learn how to actually care for someone, to care for them in a way that is respectful and lets them know your well-being matters to me? They always say, Hippocrates says, "Do no harm." Is that the same thing as do some good? I wonder.
Wow, thank you very much. That was yes, very thought-provoking. We love it. Thank you, Janice. Do you feel, or have you experienced anything similar throughout your life with the healthcare system? So that story was a story of your childhood, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So do you have another experience throughout your life that is very similar to that?
Actually, similar stories are what made me become a nurse. And I went into healthcare believing that I could make a difference, that I could make other poor people, other people who are sick, people who are in need, I could make them feel that they were cared for and cared about. Um, it was a hopeful wish. It was a desire to save the world. I learned that that system is huge, and it's an awful lot to try to overcome. You can be it's like a drop in the ocean. But that was my reason for going into nursing, is because I wanted to make a difference for my own people so that they could feel that there was someone caring for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Okay.
big system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, do you feel that racism has, or have you noticed the effects of racism more in the healthcare industry over other industries?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think that it is worse than other institutions, but it's people's lives and their well-being. It is just such a critical institution that the impact is just so much more profound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We will be talking with you and the other storytellers a little more after our next storyteller. And just to let everybody know, so after this next storyteller, Patricia Coffey, after she tells her story, I am going to ask her a couple of questions. Then I'm going to ask all the tellers a question or two, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody else in the audience to feel free to ask the tellers. Okay, so Patricia Coffey, she's next. What can I say about her? She was born interested and Iowan, and she tells, wait for it, amazing stories. Please welcome Patricia Coffey.
I needed a doctor. We hadn't lived there very long, but I went down to the hospital and found an OB with an office close to the hospital because we wanted to have another child. For my first appointment, the pregnancy test came back positive. We were happy. Now, it was 5 months later. I had not grown enough to wear any of the maternity clothes, and there had been no quickening. And so I went back to that OB and I said, I want another pregnancy test. He did that. It was negative. I said, okay, what do we do now? He said, well, he mumbled something about natural, and I went home. Now, the next day, I knew my sister was coming to visit, and she could take care of our 2-year-old and of me if I went ahead and had what I assumed would be a D&C to finish this up. I called the doctor's office. He mumbled something about natural and hung up. Susan came, and a few days later, I began to have contractions. I waited an hour and a half to be sure that's what they were, and then I called the doctor's office. He said, go to the emergency room. I called my husband. He came home to take me. And when we got there, the two of us sat on a wooden bench outside the emergency room proper for about an hour as I had contractions. The doctor wasn't there. I don't think he took me seriously. Now, hospital staff called the doctor, and about 20 minutes later, he came. They took me to an examination room, put my feet up in the stirrups. The doctor came in and said, yes, you are having contractions. I'm going to break the bag of waters. And he did, and he left. I'm there alone. And a nurse came in and said, you know, you can get up and walk around if you want to. And I said, bleeding like this? She said, oh, are you bleeding? And then she told some other people and they came and got me. They threw a blanket over me. Now, I'd worn a dress with big buttons like this, so you could unbutton it and put me in a hospital gown real easily. But no, they didn't do that. They just threw a blanket over the bloody clothes and me and sent me on a gurney with an orderly and my husband in the elevator up to a double room. My bed was on the far side. They took their gurney around there and told me to get in the bed. I made them wait while I took off my shoes and my socks. And then I got in the bed. They left. Finally, I took that call thing, and on the intercom, I said, I need a bedpan. And the nurse said, no, you don't. You just feel like that. Sobbing and begging, I finally got a bedpan. I had the miscarriage in the bedpan, still almost fully clothed and by myself. And then I took that intercom and called to have the bedpan removed. Finally, they did that. And they left. And now I call again and say, please bring a bedpan. And the nurse said, you think you need one, but you just feel like that. Sobbing and begging, I finally got another one. When they came to take that away, a nurse came in and pulled my blood-drenched clothing up and over my head and off and gave me a hospital gown. She said, do you have other children? I said, yes, I have a 2-year-old. She said, well, you'll be able to have other children. And she left. I was there. It was, supper time by then. The doctor came to the door to the room, way on the other side of my roommate, and mumbled something about natural. My husband had been in some sort of waiting room. He came to that same door and said he would be going home now, and he left. And there I was. My roommate said it would be nice to know me, and I said, yeah, maybe tomorrow. During the night, nurses came in and took my vitals. They didn't say, how are you? They didn't say, do you need something? Nothing. In the morning, the candy striper came in and was aghast and immediately ran out of the room to get the nurse because she couldn't believe I was in that blood-soaked bed. They came in and changed the bed and my gown. And then by 11 o'clock, I was released to go home. No doctor's examination, no doctor's explanation, go home. My sister came to get me and I was hemorrhaging again before we got across the parking lot, but I didn't say anything because I knew dogs and cats are treated better than I had been treated. And if I were going to bleed to death anyway, I'd like to hug my child once more and do it at home where someone cared. I found another doctor. I waited a couple of months and then made an appointment. And there I was, pregnant again. We were happy. We'd done our grieving. And this OB seemed to care about me and about the pregnancy. I went home happy. A week later, I felt a very sharp stab in the abdomen. I made my husband call the doctor's office. The doctor said, put her in the car, come to the emergency room. We will meet the car with a wheelchair. Same hospital. The neighbor took care of Dan and we left for the hospital. They met me with a wheelchair, 3 nurses. I'm up on that same floor, same hospital, same nurses, are now working to get me ready for surgery. After the surgery, it was a ruptured ovarian cyst, an internal hemorrhage this time instead of external. 3 nurses are working with me. The doctor came into my room, sat down and talked to me. He explained everything and told me what was going to happen next. He said, surgery is a very strong event, but it doesn't mean the pregnancy will end. I'm going to keep you here until I can be sure that you are rested enough for the pregnancy to have a good chance. I was in the middle bed of 3, and they told me my vitals would have to stabilize before I could go home. The nurses came in about the 2nd day and they said I should sit up. I tried, but my head disappeared. Then they said, well, then roll over. I tried, but it felt like I was fastened to the bed. They cut back on the sedatives. About the 4th day, I could sit up. And when I did that, we discovered that about a 4-inch piece of tape had come loose, and I was, in fact, fastened to the bed. My husband said he didn't know I could swear like that. Now I was able to just rest, except those people kept changing in the beds on either side of me. And every time that changed, my vitals went wacko. On the 10th day, I went to the bathroom and I felt 4 very sharp stabs. And I called the nurse. She came immediately. I said, I think that's the miscarriage. She said, I think you're right. She helped me back to my bed. The doctor came to examine me and talk to me. And then the next day, the 11th day, I was able to go home. Once again, we did our grieving. And about 2 years after that, we had our 2nd strong and healthy son. Now, all along, I'd been thinking I made a poor choice in doctors. But after many conversations with Janice and the work in Stories in Living Color, I think I was somebody. I was somebody white and drifting along on white privilege because I could make meaningful choices.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. Thank you. Waiting for the applause to die out. All right, so let me ask you one of the, just one, because there were several powerful moments and visuals in your story, but one of the most powerful moments was when you very first said, if I'm going to bleed to death, I'd much rather go home, bleed to death at home, around, surrounded by people I love. And I've heard that sentiment by a lot of other times, and by probably some of the people here in this room have in fact experienced that. Hopefully not, but it might have happened. My question to you is, do you think that experience, that particular feeling is enhanced more through racism, or is it just an overall problem with the healthcare industry?
I thought it was just an individual poor choice, but I think it's systemic, and I think it has more to do with race than we like to think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Do you have you heard from anyone else other than yourself, other than your race, eh, similar stories to yours?
These events took place in the 60s in Texas. I was only out of Iowa for 5 years, you guys, and then I realized my mistake and came home. But I survived Texas medicine. There are 3 other stories. And one of the hospitals in the Houston area is Ben Taub, T-A-U-B. And he's some sort of a famous person, but it's where the indigent people go. And one of those examination tables in the maternity ward only has 1 stirrup. That's for one-legged pregnant people. It was joked about. I think there are appalling things, and I think we have to speak up about it, and I think we have to pay attention, not just for ourselves, for other people that we care about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you very much. So I want to take a moment, and I want to have all of you give each of our awesome storytellers wonderful thanks. I'd like to ask you to either, if you want to do it on camera, if you want to do it using the reaction button, if you want to do it in the chat, please do. And tellers, please accept this time as thanks.
Thank you.
So I would like to ask all of you, each of you, to respond to this question. I want to start with Harlan, though, because I understand. So part of your bio, which I didn't read, was that you are now really focused on telling stories to children and telling stories to adults, much more, like you said, you're not used to even telling myths. It's more folktales. I'm really curious how this whole experience was for you, and especially in working with Jackie, and if she influenced your understanding or your love for telling stories.
She really had to encourage me because I have never told on Zoom. I tried telling one children's story on the internet when I was still a librarian, when COVID shut down all of our libraries in San Diego, and I hated it. I couldn't figure out where to put my eyes, and you know, so she really had to encourage me, and you know, she was so kind in saying that she loved the story and wanted me to tell it.
So let me just repeat that for the other tellers to answer it. So specifically, what the question is I'm asking you about your experience in this. And if your partner, so thank you very much, Harlan. But if your partner has helped you see stories and or racism differently. So let's now let's hear. Okay, let's hear from Jackie. Let's just go down the line. Jackie?
So Harlan, working with Harlan was interesting because I'm working with someone who doesn't do personal stories, and I, over the course of my career, have shifted almost entirely away from mythology and from folk tales and into things that are personal. Even when I tell a folk tale, it's framed as a personal story. So I had to. So I went into it thinking that we were each going to tell a personal story, and when I looked at when I listened to Harlan, and I looked at other things, I cyber stalked her. So I looked at other things she had done, and I realized that she spoke through mythology and folk tales. And so I wanted to help her see that that was a perfectly legitimate way to do it. And I wanted to see that juxtaposition. And also having to explain to someone what it's like, and someone who listens very well and who understands what you're saying, but having to explain to someone out loud what it's like to inhabit the world outside of whiteness, but in the white gaze, it softened my feelings about some of that, simply because I've explained it all my life, but I was explaining it in this instance to someone who had decided to listen. And when someone decides to listen to you, it changes the experience of explaining. So I wanted to thank Harlan for making that decision, and thank you all for starting this conversation. That's an entirely different experience than being Cassandra and shouting out into the wind.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah, Harlan and I cry a lot together.
I would love to say that working with Pat has been such a joy and such a, I'm not going to say anything on a large scale, just on a woman-to-woman basis. I've loved sharing with her. I'm so grateful for Rick pairing us together. I know that Pat and I'll continue to talk. I hope you know that, Pat. We're not ever going to stop talking. She and I have a love of certain things that we have shared in common, and I've loved meeting her, knowing her. I feel a very closeness to her. I just short of saying that I've come to know and care for Pat very much. And so I'm grateful for this experience, if for only because I've met someone that I never would have met, and I've come to know her, come to share a part of her heart. And I'm so grateful to Rick and grateful for this program. And I love you, Pat. Thank you so much for all that you've shared with me. You've been wonderful.
Well, I can't top that. I can only say, Janice and I used to say, now this is off topic, but we've had to stop saying that because we don't have any off topics. We will talk about anything. And I have learned so much from Janice. She is big city, I am little city. But we have so many things in common. We're both single parents of sons. We were both librarians, and we both like to listen to stories and figure things out. I think Rick did a marvelous job in matching us up. And we are going to keep talking.
Wonderful, wonderful. And did you, so specifically Janice and Patricia, has your experience, so Patricia, you mentioned the the fact that Janice is from a larger area, more metropolitan area than you are, which is a really big factor. Has her experiences as a Black woman influenced your experiences as a white woman at all? As far as racism is concerned?
I don't know about that, but I know at one point I talked about two stories I tell. And one, I add race because I can see the faces and the assumptions that are being made. And in the other, I subtract race because I can see the assumptions in the faces around me. And we talked about those two stories. If I started out me and you didn't know anything about me, and I started to tell you a story about a large junior high school in the city that was tough territory, what assumptions would you begin to make about that story? And so I finally had to add the fact all 944 students look just like me. In fact, it's in the area where I went to school and was now teaching, because I could see assumptions being made. In the other story, I stopped to help some people on the highway. I saw a deer come out and crash into their windshield and total their truck. I pulled over and stayed with them and helped them and took them on home. We spent a whole day together. We had wonderful conversations. It's a Black couple. So I'm going down to see the Southern families, and I left that part out. Because if I kept it in, then I tried leaving it in. I just said what had happened. And what I got was, well, gee, you have to be really careful, those people. And so I said, you know, I think it's really hard to train a wild deer to leap into the windshield and total a pickup just so you can pick on a little old lady. But the story became one where I took race out, and the other story became one where I put race in, because Janice and I have talked a lot about assumptions, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Janice, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think that Pat's been pretty comprehensive. When Pat tells me that how she put race, she could take it in and put it out. I said, I always say to myself, that must be wonderful to be able to do that, because it is omnipresent for me. You cannot take it in and put it out. It's always there. People assume that because you are Black, that you are talking about someone Black. So it's not something that I can take in and put out. It's just like the skin I'm in.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. What I would like to do is thank you. You are all amazing tonight. I'm really thankful that I got to share this with the rest of our SAC community, and in the future, other people on YouTube, whoever might come across this video, because you are all very amazing stories. These are amazing stories and well told. At this point, what I would like to do is I would like to open this up to the audience. If any of you have questions, I see that there have been some really wonderful comments in the chat. I'm not sure if you want me to read the comments. So what I will say is, if you do, I will read any comment from now on. If you write a chat from now on, I'll read that to everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand through the participants, or you can even go to the reactions button because it depends on the device that you're using and how it's set up for you. But there is a reactions button on PCs, for instance, that you can click on that has things like applause and claps and thumbs up and whatnot. You can either use the raising of your hand, or you can use the participants reaction button to get my attention. And we have one person here who has a question. iPad 2. iPad 2 has a question. So please, iPad 2, let's unmute you and please ask your question.
Yes, my name is Tessa Clark, and I'd like to know if Janice feels that her experience going with her mother to the doctor in retrospect has much changed from her experience, has much changed today as an adult, having become a nurse and having more examples to compare that with.
Thank you for that question, Ms. Clark. All I can say is that was a mild experience. My experience was very mild compared to what I've seen other children have to go through. That was a relatively mild and benign experience. I'm almost embarrassed to say that it was hurtful, because I have seen children endure much more and families endure far worse. So no, I don't think anything has changed at all.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to make some change. Thank you.
Yes, we will. All right, well, thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Malcolm, there was a question that was in the chat. Someone said that they had a daughter who was a doctor in Vegas, and she was asking for some guidance or counseling as to how her daughter could possibly handle talking with a Black couple about their child, even though the Black couple seemed to have had some very bad experiences and were very mistrustful of her as a white doctor. I can only tell anyone to just be yourself. Come in with an open heart and a sensitive heart, and be sensitive to the people that you're talking to, and just be yourself. That's all you can be. That's the guidance that I would give anyone. Just try to be in tune with that family and read their signals, and just be open to them, asking them for their questions, how I can explain this to you. Just be yourself.
And if I can add one really quick thing to that too, is it's also about projection. So if you're thinking about race, if you're thinking that race is an issue, then that is going to project and race will be an issue. So yes, be yourself, and don't think that race is an issue. Just try and get the best health care that you can, or get the best conversation, or whatever it may be, the transaction may be. Just approach it as you would if race was not an issue.
Well, could I say just two things I think might help medical providers?
Please do.
Sit down to talk to them and put your notes down. Sit down as though you were going to help them understand something important and you didn't have anything else in the world to do that was more important than helping them understand that. Sit down, put the notes down, have a talk.
Very good. Very good. Yes. Yes.
Can I-
Darren said, be in the moment.
And that's good.
Mm-hmm. Be in the moment. Be yourself. Sit down. Be conscientious of what you're doing. If race is in your mind and it's going to be a factor in your mind, you're influencing the transaction.
You are. Yeah.
Don't do that. All right.
I see I could unmute myself,
Yes.
so I will just barge in.
Okay, please,
Uh,
Susan.
Thank you. I had a question for all four of the tellers, or maybe the two groups. When you first were paired by Rick for this, how many times did you meet? Did you talk? Was this like a couple months period that you spent some time getting to know each other, listening to the stories, working things through, being open to learning?
Pat and I started in August. We started calling, we scheduled ourselves to talk every Tuesday at 11 o'clock. And that's pretty much what we did every Tuesday. We talked about a lot of things before we actually zeroed in on the story. We really just got to know each other. And a commonality that really helped us is that I had always wanted to involve puppets in my storytelling. And unbeknownst to me, Pat is a puppeteer.
So, and in our conversations, as I said, we had to stop saying, now this is off topic, because it just got to the place where we talked about everything. We had maybe half a dozen pairs we could have told, and this is what we settled on, because it really is what we don't talk about and we need to talk about. Rick asked us, we volunteered separately. We didn't know each other. We all volunteered separately. Then Rick matched us up and he asked us to send enough information about ourselves that he could make a good match. So Janice and I are a good match. We are. Rick did a nice job.
Yes, he did.
So that's how it works, though. We sent information to Rick and then everybody did that and then he paired folks up.
I'll let Jackie answer.
So Harlan and I were a lot looser than that. We didn't have a schedule or anything like that. And we just sort of, we chose each other and then we just kind of exchanged a few things. I think the reason it worked for us is because even though on the surface we look really different, we tend to have the same core. So it didn't take a lot of talking. I was worried about Harlan at first.
Were.
I was worried because you gave me this thing. And then suddenly Harlan she just came up with this story that was so dark. And I'm like, yes, I do dark. And it was fine. And when we talked, we didn't really talk as much about the stories as talk to each other. And I think that that's what helped. And I really think that's what this project is for. It's not so much, it's not so much about the stories as about the connections between the tellers.
Yeah, I might not have, Jackie and Malcolm and Rick both saw, my entire mess of how I was raised as a racist. And for me, it wasn't actually, telling that out loud, but sitting down and silently going through my life, and seeing, the questions that all of us white people should be asking ourselves, where did it start? And for me, it started as a baby, because I still have photographs of me with a mammy doll in my crib, and I lived in Illinois.
Well,
And
Illinois
gave it to me.
Illinois is northern Mississippi, though, Harlan. And here's the thing that was so neat, though, about talking to Harlan, is that she has an ability she has a self-awareness that is unusual. And so just kind of, because a lot of people stop growing around 30, and to meet somebody who's just continually growing and continually asking and searching it's a delight. So we've said we won't be getting rid of each other. So there you go.
All right. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank all of the audience. Actually, myself and the storytellers want to thank all of the audience, all of you, for taking your time to come and spend with us to hear our stories. Thank you very much. And we wish you a wonderful, wonderful, safe, COVID-free holiday season. And I would also like to remind everyone that our next Stories in Living Color will be in January. We have not yet set a date, but please stay tuned to both the website, storysac.org, and to the email list as to when our next storytelling event will be. All right. Thank you very much again. Bye.
Thank you, Mel.